So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us, and I'm really excited about this webinar. This is Tara from Vermont Fresh Network, and we'll be talking with Brent Harrewyn, a professional photographer, professional food photographer, and does a lot of landscapes and product shots. But I think it's always good. We all have a phone, and we take pictures for our businesses or organizations for social and stuff like that. But there are times when you want to work with a professional photographer. So let's hear from Brent, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can start. Okay, take it away, Brent.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for being here. I'm here at my home office in Winooski with you guys, and yeah, I'm a local photographer to the Vermont food culture scene. I photo edit for Edible Green Mountains, which is a local food culture project. It's a quarterly magazine, and I spend a lot of time working with small businesses, particularly in the food scene, restaurants, food producers. I shoot product, a lot of food-related products, and I visit a lot of farms and shoot a lot of editorial assignments for the magazine, and particularly in 7 days and 7 nights. Some of you guys might be familiar with the 7 Nights Annual project. And that sends me all over the state, shooting at restaurants and working with food producers. And so it's cool to be able to get out there and interact with those that are working in the food scene in Vermont, which can be quite innovative. And we're doing a lot of good things in this state, in and out of the restaurants and around farms and whatnot. So yeah, that's kind of what I do and spend most of my time doing. And I grew up in the food industry. My folks are restaurant owners, Chef's Corner in Vermont. Spent quite a bit of time traveling around the world, chasing my parents bringing me with them as they traveled around the world working at restaurants, and we ended up settling in Vermont. They own a restaurant in Williston, Chef's Corner, cafe and bakery. So I spent my time growing up in kitchens and interacting with chefs and restaurant owners, and just exposed to the food scene as a kid. And then growing into it, I spent time working in restaurants, and started in the dish pits and worked my way up. And so I know how to cook. Yeah, and it got to a point where I realized I didn't want to spend my time working in kitchens. I saw how hard my dad worked and how tough that was on the family. And it took me a few years to figure out that I could match my passion for photography with my passion with food, and still be a part of the community. And so it took a little bit of time, but figure that out. And here I am in Vermont, taking pictures of food.
And food's pretty challenging. I think food's one of those challenging, what, do you find it challenging, or what's?
I do, it can be challenging. I feel like, for me, it sort of comes naturally, only because of my exposure to the food scene and my obsession with food magazines, and flipping through them and just knowing how to cook. I think it goes with anything. If you're exposed to it and you have a passion for it, then it can come easy eventually. But it's always a challenge, and it takes time, and there are techniques and constant technologies to keep up with in professional photography, because it can be competitive. And so, yeah, it can be challenging. It depends. It's never the same, each assignment. And so, yeah, the cool thing about food is that it doesn't blink, and it doesn't talk, and it doesn't, move when you've got it set in its place. And so it can be simpler from certain angles, but then it can be complicated from others, especially if you're shooting ice cream and it starts to melt on you.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure certain colors, I know that, I don't know.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Color theory plays a factor in it. And around aesthetics, and it can match up with the feel of your restaurant or your farm or whatever. But yeah, certain colors can translate differently from certain brand technologies and different types of cameras. So yeah.
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 Just a quick question. So, while you work on editorial type photography, of course, for Edible Green Mountains, and we talked about professionally working on, I would say, more commercial stuff, whether it be products or shooting at restaurants or farms, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do people find you, or how's that process go, basically? If someone wanted to hire you or wanted to hire a professional photographer, what are the things that they should take into account?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how do people find me, I've been a part of the Vermont food scene and community for quite some time, so I think I have a bit of an advantage to those that are just entering the Vermont scene as a professional photographer. I haven't really spent much time investing in advertising and whatnot, and so as Vermont is, it's a small kind of word of mouth scene, and so my family knows a lot of restaurant owners, and so I'm blessed to have that network available to me, and so it's a lot of word of mouth in Vermont, but once you start reaching outside of the state, you're looking to explore and bring in work in certain arenas like New York City, then SEO plays a big role in that. In terms of people reaching out to me, and a lot of people initiate contact not really necessarily knowing what they need, so they know they want to explore the opportunity of investing in professional photography. And so, a lot of people reach out and they're like, how does your process work? Where do we start? And that's when we engage in that dialogue on, and I find myself helping potential clients figure out exactly what it is that they need, I ask questions like, how do you want to use the photos? And in what style? Is it for social media, for your website? A lot of this stuff can be pretty particular in its vision once it comes to fruition. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I help guide people to the production that we eventually get into. But yeah. Anyways, I just kind of went off there on a tangent. What was the?
I was just wondering, so let's say I have a business or a farm or a food business, and I need some professional photography, whether it is for a website, whether it is for print, etc.
Yeah.
What's that? You talked about kind of building a relationship with the client, and kind of figuring out the images, or maybe the brand image, I would say, that they want to portray. So what is from pre-production to post, basically, from beforehand as you plan for the shoot to the shoot, and then after that, because post shoot, there are all these steps and there's a process there too, of course. Can you just talk a little bit about that, and also discuss your recommendations for a good process, basically, with you, what are the ones that work best,
Yep. Yeah. So, for instance, if a restaurant is looking to produce content for their website, then sometimes they'll come straight to me and ask about that. That's when I ask the restaurant manager, whoever's looking to produce the content, if they've had the dialogue with the web designer. And so you kind of need to look ahead to, envision the end result before we get into producing specifics on the content, right? So these days, a lot of times we're kind of just producing for the website. And once you start a dialogue with the designer, then they can kind of sketch out what the website's going to look like, which in hand determines how we set up compositions for specific photos. Oftentimes, it's simpler than that. Oftentimes, a restaurant just wants to shoot a handful of menu items, and then from there, kind of, they'll sit on, I'll deliver the assets, and then they're sitting on the assets, and then they kind of figure out how they want to use it from there. So there's a couple of different ways that you can approach producing shoots, but in terms of getting things booked, is this kind of where we want this part of the discussion to go?
I just want, I'm wondering, like, you might have some strategies and tips that, projects that have gone really well and there's been great preparation, and there's certain questions that are answered that, people may not know to ask. And then we've all had the shoots that maybe don't go as well for whatever reason, and you learn from that. So what are your, what's your advice for businesses or farms and restaurants, if they were to, what are the good steps basically to have a successful, end result?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of this is creating that vision and coming up with a shot list. I mean, the shot lists are one of the most important things that you can do going into a photo shoot, especially if you're looking at producing photography assets for a menu. In terms of farms, you can be a little bit more, you can be less structured. Sometimes, I'll get commissioned by some farms to just show up and spend a day kind of shooting the scene, and floating around on my own and creating photos as the day kind of unfolds in front of me. So there doesn't necessarily have to be so much structure in the coverage. But like back to restaurants, a shot list is quite crucial, and sketching out the timing of the day. And so that's when restaurants work with me in the flow of the day. Because the stuff does take time, and to have me come in during, dinner service may not be the best choice. I often find that the most successful shoots are those that, schedule time with me during those off hours, and chefs tend to kind of hum and haw at that idea because they've got to come in a lot earlier than they normally do. But that's when I can have their undivided attention in that collaboration of, setting up dishes, and working the styling, and, just overall prepping for the shoot. These things do take quite a bit of time. And so I think, time and sketching out an agenda and the scheduling is very important.
I would say that in my past experience that, and I think we discussed this previously in a call, that it's always good to go in with a plan and a schedule. We need to get these certain shots, and by allowing yourself to have a shot list of the basic shots, that allows you to get the extra shots, like the frosting shots. Yep. But so even if you were talking about shooting at farms and just going in and kind of just, in a way, documentary style, right, for a day. Yeah. and going in doing what you want, and that style can of course be used in other, restaurants can do that too, but absolutely. I think it depends on the topic. So, right, or the subject matter and the style, basically. So let's say it's a farm shoot. you could do documentary style and go in and like spend the day and the way the lighting changes and you know, freelance that and
Yeah.
you know, but then on the other hand, you could go to that same farm with a shot list saying, oh, I need to get a shot of the barn from this point, or etc.
Yep.
How, you know, what are the things that um, you would say to clients to consider beforehand, like things to think about? I know my experience, if I've gone to a farm, you know, and I've spoken with a a farmer, you know, they spend a lot of time on their land. So, you know, a lot of time, right? So they know certain things that they know the pretty spots sometimes, and they can make recommendations.
Yep.
My phone's ringing. Yeah. So, what would you say about that in that sort of preparation?
Yeah, and you know, this is always a collaboration between myself and those that are commissioning me to produce these photos. And so the priority is really what you know, these businesses, restaurants, or farms. The priority is what they think they want and need, and but then they ask, you know, they're often asking me what I think, you know, and from experience, I am communicating, and it ends up becoming a collaboration. And so things don't necessarily have to always be so rigid in the organizing efforts, especially and it depends on the style, you know, it depends on the subject matter, it depends on the locations, it depends on scheduling opportunities. But yeah, you know, it's different from one business to another. So farm stands have a little bit of a different structure than a fine dining French restaurant, you know, and so I adapt to those conditions and those needs. I actually just brought up some photos from a farm that I shot at in Ferrisburg, Leicester Farm and Farm Stand. Just share my screen here. Let's see. And so this project here, can you guys see that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Let's see. So this was a pretty kind of loose-ended. You know, we didn't really have much of a shot list. They're like, yeah, just come spend a half a day on our property. You know, they pointed out a few kind of key locations. You know, there was a couple of things that they wanted shot, like the inside of the farm stand, and that's what I did. But then they trusted me, you know, in floating around and producing photos for their website, and just was kind of letting the day unfold in front of me. And you know, this is kind of when the most organic photos, you know, happen, is when you don't necessarily have a rigid structure in approaching the day. And this is a farm, you know, this isn't like I said, it's not a French white linen restaurant, you know, it's a different approach to how we shoot. So, and I can bring up another example of that. So, you guys seeing that? So, on this was done all in a half a day. So I was moving pretty quickly. And in terms of setting up expectations in what's going to be delivered, that's something to, you know, have a dialogue about with your photographer that you're hiring. What can you expect in the delivery? How many photos are you expecting to end up with? You know, a big question to ask before you even ask for a estimate or a quote is, you know, what kind of rights are we looking at? You know, how are you able to use your photos? Because some photographers are, you know, their structure can be different than mine in how they set up rights to use the photos. You know, sometimes you're set up with a package where you're only allowed to use images for the web. Sometimes you're set up with a package that allows you to use images for web and print. Maybe there's a license that the photographer's offering where, you know, you need to renew the license on an annual basis. So I try and keep things simple. Yeah, that's a big question to ask before going into the shoot is how are the rights set up? So anyways, just, you got to stop me I can go off and I won't stop talking.
No, it's good. No, it's very, no, I'm listening. It's very good. You know, so let's, you know, do you do primarily natural light shooting?
No, I mean,
you have a lot of,
it depends on the subject matter. Yeah. I mean, I spend a lot of time shooting with natural light, but then also, when I photograph food, commercially, oftentimes editorially, like you can't just walk into any restaurant and expect the light to feature the food in its natural light, right? I'm almost always bringing in my own lighting technology and techniques, and it's mostly artificial light because, you know, more times than none, restaurants don't have the adequate lighting to, you know, showcase the food cleanly, if you will.
Well, any sort of interior shoot, I would think. It's always good to have a little backup lighting to open up the shadows, because mainly when you go into rooms or places, the lighting is from above, and sometimes your angle is such that you need a little bit of light in another spot, right?
Yeah, and you know, ambient lighting oftentimes isn't clean light when you're looking when it translates to how the camera reads it, especially with food. It's like food's very similar in how you photograph portraits of people. You need clean light to render an image that reflects accurately of the subject, right? And so that's why a lot of times, you know, we see on social media people, you know, how we've come into this day and age where people are taking photos of their food all the time, you know. This kind of started about 5 or 6 years ago on Instagram. Everybody was taking pictures of their food, and we can see what works and what doesn't. And we're becoming, as consumers of digital media, we're becoming more privy to what looks best and what doesn't, whether we know it or not, you know. And so that's where professional photographers come into play, is that we are bringing technology with us to help produce these images. I can actually bring up a shoot from a couple years ago here that it was quite involved. This was a 2-day shoot over at Blue Seafood of Vermont in Burlington. Here, let me just share the screen. And this took 2 days to get through the shot list. They kind of wanted quite a bit of images from the menu and their catering offerings. Yeah, you know, as simple as it looks, the lighting setups, and I wish I had some behind the scenes photos of the lighting setups here, guys, but to produce these clean images, this is all artificial light that I had set up, and you know, no photographer setup is the same, but I try and keep it simple. And yeah, I mean, it's, you know, there's quite a bit of technology involved in producing these types of images.
Brent, I would also say, you know, I don't know how much post-production you do on your, you know, what kind of software you use after you shoot. But if you're shooting, I assume well, I don't know if you're shooting raw, but, and you can, okay, so can you just talk a little bit about that part of it also in relation to how you do your production?
Yeah, you know, and all these photos, all these images, shooting raw, so it's the equivalent of, you know, when we used to shoot film, we had our negatives, right? And so I'm shooting digital negatives that require processing, and we've all got our techniques in post-production, and we try and develop a look that is our own, and in keeping things simple, especially when you're shooting food. You don't want to overcomplicate things. But yeah, all of these, and I can actually share my screen here. I can maybe bring this over. Yeah, I mean, I'm sweeping all my images through Lightroom, and there is a post-production process that can be quite involved. And you know, you're culling through hundreds of images through each shoot, and that's you know, a lot of time goes into, you know, I might shoot a sequence of photos of a cheeseburger, and I shot 50 images because of the styling efforts that got me to that last image, you know. And so a lot of it is working through the shoot, and those styling efforts that land you at that last photo, you know. But yeah, there's quite a bit of post-production that goes into it. I keep things quite simple, so I'm not gonna like futz around too much. I might like clone out a scratch in the silverware or something, but I'm keeping things quite organic in my approach, and I'm trying to keep things as natural as possible, and just to you know, uphold an integrity to you know, the product that I'm shooting, you know. So yeah, things can be actually a little different. And when I'm shooting product for like catalogs, I'm going to share my screen here of a shoot that I did for Burn Chocolates. Now, post-production, can you see this? Can you?
Yes, definitely.
Can you see that screen? Yeah. So once you start kind of looking at a product through a magnifying glass, like we are here, then I'm spending hours on post-production, cloning out dust and scratches in the chocolate, only because these photos are being used in catalogs and are being used at in print to print like huge banners for food shows.
Yeah.
Right. And so when images are being used on that scale, you've got to take a look at it with that magnifying glass and just kind of like really clean things up. And it's not that I'm not being true to the reality of what the product is, but when we pick up one of these chocolates and we eat it, we're not like looking at it, we're not going in like this before we eat that chocolate. But you're doing that when you look at the photo and it's blown up, right? And so you gotta kind of clean things up a little bit there. And so it depends, I'm not going to spend as much time editing a cheeseburger as I am a truffle chocolate, and that seems weird. But.
No, you know what? I think truffle chocolates, I can see why you would edit more than a cheeseburger. Cheeseburgers, are kind of messy anyway, right? But these are kind of, I think chocolate, the way they're shot, and they're like little jewels, right? So
yeah, they're more delicate,
more delicate. And also, if you're speaking as someone who, basically tempering chocolate, it can be hard, and so if there's any sort of strangeness on the chocolate, it could make people think that the chocolate maker doesn't know what they're doing, right? If there's like an air bubble or a piece of dust,
right.
Or anything. So it has to, the way that product is, it has to look smooth in the right spots, I would think.
Yeah, and in like our 3D reality, we're not going in with a magnifying glass on this type of product. We're just we're enjoying them, we're consuming them. But when it comes to seeing them in print or on web, we have a minute to kind of look at this 2D image and pick it apart. Oftentimes we don't do that, but in terms of delivering a professional image, this is kind of what goes into it.
Yeah.
And also too, to be competitive as a professional photographer, you need to pay attention to that type of detail, because clients, businesses that are looking for high-end photography, they're going to shop around, and they're going to see that in the competition, and might be the difference between getting hired or not. So.
Yeah. Just a question regarding composition and how you're composing shots,
Yep.
What are the things that because of course depending on the image, you can always change your composition a little bit by cropping in post-production, but in the moment, during a shoot, for a product shoot, a shot needs to be for products, I would think, needs to be composed. I mean, those were certainly set up a certain way. And I mean, even that shot right there with the eggs, and, can you talk a little bit about composition?
Yeah. So, I mean, this shot, for instance, probably, so I set the camera up, and then I start moving the dish around. And I first, you got to ask yourself, a lot of dishes, there's pretty much one angle, maybe two, that you can shoot them at, right? And so identifying that angle is the first thing that I do. And then I kind of, I set the camera height, and then start futzing around with the plate, and then what's going to work in and around the subject, which is this eggs and hash, veggie beef hash. I asked myself, what do I want to include on this scene? And as you can see, I kind of worked in quite a bit here. But when you're talking about composition, you're talking about balance. And it also depends on whether or not you're expecting to include ad copy on that composition. And so it depends, sometimes you don't necessarily need to be that picky if these photos are just going to be used on a website for a menu gallery. But if you know that an image is going to be used for a banner on Facebook, and you wanted to include some ad copy in there, then you make specific adjustments to the composition. But in general, like, composition is really kind of about balance, and that's where I've been trained. I've gone to school for this. I've been trained in composition, what the rules are, but then also knowing how to break those rules as long as it's intentional. And so, whether we know it or not as consumers, composition, we can identify like what's off about an image. Like as consumers, when we see an image that's composition isn't balanced, we're like, okay, something's weird about that, whether we know it or not. So.
I mean, I would say the same thing can be said because in shooting video, when editing, if there are two pieces of video that are edited together and the timing is off, people may not know what the issue is, but they can sometimes feel it. Like, oh, something made me feel strange, or the shot changed and I noticed it. You're not supposed to be able to notice that.
Yeah. And you know what, that becomes that's a distraction that we as photographers try to avoid, and finding that balance makes it easier on the eye, and it just makes it easier for us to kind of get into that image and to have our attention drawn right to the subject at hand. I mean, this has a little bit more going on with it, but still feel it has a pretty good balance in that, you can kind of dive into this image as a viewer. Maybe the eye goes straight to the eggs and then to the foreground to the potatoes, and then you move to the juice and the croissants and the muffins in the background. There can be clutter, but there can also be balance at the same time. And it's all about how you want the viewer's attention to move around through the image.
And I would also say in that shot, I'm sorry, I interrupted, but you're talking about visual balance, right? In composition, visual balance, but I would also say in that previous shot, like color balance, where the way things are placed. You had the flowers in the back, and then in the foreground, I think there was a little bowl of yogurt with more flowers. And so that brings me to like, do you have an assistant? Do you work with a stylist, or how does this work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually style my own work. But I'm collaborating with the restaurant managers and the chefs in setting up the food, right? So say that we've got a team of cooks that are running this food out to me, and I'm kind of letting them do their thing. But then if that I actually remember that they brought out that yogurt in the foreground, and it had like maybe one flower in the middle of it, but then I'm requesting that we add more flowers to it, just because it kind of fills in that white space that the yogurt is. I might have requested that they bring in I think I remember there was a cranberry juice there, but then it was just like the red was looking too dark, and it was just kind of a distraction. So, we pulled the cranberry juice, and it ends up becoming a collaboration. But when, some shots are more complicated than others, like this one and this one, it can take quite a bit of time to kind of settle into the styling of the shot that you're looking to produce. For me, I try and make it a collaborative effort between myself and, if I'm working with a chef. And so we work together. But yeah, I'm styling my shoots on my own.
Okay, so I have two more questions, and one will be a quick one. But some of these, of course, while you style it on your own, some of these are considered like action shots. I saw a shot previously where someone's pouring maple syrup or picking it up. Now, is that the kitchen manager or the the dining room manager, and you're saying 3, 2, 1, and try the movement? How does
exactly.
Adding,
That's exactly what's happening, and people have fun with it. They appreciate and are willing to be a part of that collaboration. And it can be exciting for restaurants when they're producing a shoot for the first time and having a professional photographer come in, and I bring assistants. Sometimes I'll shoot on my own, but in setting up a collaboration with restaurant managers and the owners and the chefs, it becomes a fun project for everybody, and it makes it exciting, and you include everybody in on it. I'm not the only one that's helping to produce these images. There's a team behind it, and it can be a fun collaboration.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk about rights for a moment. Can we just elaborate on rights and who gets to use the image? And because that of course is it's a big topic, right? Especially with the advent, the internet. People are like, oh, there's an apple, I can use it, and you can't take a picture and just use it for yourself because it's basically stealing.
Yep.
But and I say basically, but it is, So how's that conversation work when you speak with clients, and how does that work for you as a photographer?
Yeah. So when I get an inquiry for a shoot, and we'll say it's for a restaurant that wants photos shot of their menu, then I'm going to ask them, well, what is the intended use of the photos? They might be, for our website and social media. And we may or may not want to use the images for print ads in the future. And so the priority for them is digital. And so that's kind of where we set them up as. But I try and keep things very simple in Vermont because the small businesses in Vermont are often not privy to how rights work in terms of photography usage. Oftentimes I'm setting up folks with packages that are inclusive of web and print usage. Photographers always own their images, right? It's always, unless otherwise specified, right? And that can get very expensive if you want the photographer to sign over the exclusive rights to the images that they're producing. So the images that restaurants use of mine, they're licensed the use of those images, and oftentimes it's unlimited, non-exclusive rights, whereas they're able to use the images however they want to, whenever they want to, but I still own the images, so I can use those images editorially or stock or whatever,
Yeah, and also to promote, on your website to show other.
Yep. I do try and keep things simple. Some photographers are a little bit more involved in how they set up usage of their photos. It can get quite expensive. And it all depends on the client that the photographer is working with. And it's all scalable, right? So you can ask me, what my hourly rate is, or how much is it going to cost to photograph a menu? Well, it's all these things are set up with a custom quote. And so I don't necessarily have a menu, a rate menu. It's all scalable, and they're all customized.
Nice.
According to the needs and the intended use. So.
Yeah. Of course. And that makes sense. It's customized to the client. And so we're coming up on 12:45. So we're coming at the end. And I just wanted to toss out to everyone viewing, if you have any questions, please just add it to the chat box here and ask your question. Is there any topics that you would like discussed or reviewed. And if it's not, just kind of post there in the chat box, and we'll cover it. I would also say that, and this is something that I've talked with clients before about, or just worked with people, businesses with, the idea of coming up with a content library. And,
Yeah.
Especially like if you have a farm stand or a farm, or if that's your type of business, it's seasonal, right? And the idea of coming with a seasonal content library.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think and this kind of goes back to the big question, why hire a professional photographer, and when do you hire a professional photographer? Because we can create content on social media on our own. We can have the restaurant manager documenting the daily specials for social media, which can be very very productive. It engages your audience. You're updating what's happening in your culture. Behind the scenes in the kitchen is really cool, and you can't necessarily always have a professional photographer showing up to do that, and that can get pricey unless you've got the budget for it. But you got to ask the question, when to hire a professional photographer, and what do you want to use those assets for? I think for social media, we can produce that content on our own. And, coming back to your question in producing seasonal content, to have professional photography assets, for your restaurant, if you know that you're gonna have menu items that are gonna be on your menu full time, it's good to have that. And particularly for your website, I think websites are so important these days. Your social media presence is really important. Facebook, that's kind of where all the eyes are. And to have professional assets that are reflecting your brand in a clear light is really important, as well as showcasing your culture, within your company or restaurant. I'm going to share my screen here in a second. Just websites. This is a local website, Chef's Corner, my family's restaurant. And I did the photography for this. And just setting up an image-driven website that shows client, your potential customers, what you're all about. Like, we're at a place now where, actually, I saw this stat where we can digest information in a photograph like 30,000 times faster than we can words, right? So the old saying goes, pictures speak 1,000 words. That's kind of showcases the importance of good photography.
Yeah, I mean,
this is a cool, just one second, actually. So you guys, if you're looking to produce photography for restaurants, I found this cool website that is showcasing 12 of this editor's favorite restaurant websites, and they're from all over the world. And so you can kind of go in and check it out. But in my exploring these websites, they're all very heavily image driven, right? Beautifully done. But then, they're all like linking back to social media, where they're all producing images on their own internally for Instagram and whatnot.
Yeah. And I will say at the very top there, going back to composition, that very first image of this website was clearly composed. Look,
right.
So there's that right there. You were talking about graphics and how to incorporate if you're going to have something with graphics on top.
Yep.
That's a good example. And the other thing, of course, regarding food or any piece of any image, it's about you want to get visual information across, but it's also about connecting in an emotional way, especially with, depending on the brand or, that sort of thing. But
the culture too. I think highlighting the culture behind the company is becoming so much more important these days, as opposed to going on the web and using stock photography.
Yeah.
Custom photography can be very powerful in a sense that you're showcasing your culture. I'm trying to look for this website that does a really good job at showcasing the internal culture and like behind the scenes, with chef bios, staff profiles. It's just nice,
Yeah. What about props? How, when you work with clients, depending on what you're going to be shooting, let's say it's going to be cocktails, or let's say it's going to be, whatever you'll be shooting. How do you have a meeting prior, or do you go over to scout the area just to be like, okay, what kind of props are available? That's probably something you would work with with the chef or the restaurant manager. They would be able to work with you. But can you just talk a little bit about what you have prepared beforehand and what kind of conversations you have?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of shooting food at restaurants, I keep things pretty simple and tend to only use what's available in the restaurant, only just because what you're doing is you're reflecting the reality of what's happening at the restaurant, right? So I'm not going to bring in plates that aren't used at the restaurant.
No, but let's say if it's a food product, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and I don't do all the shooting for Vermont Creamery. Do you see this screen here?
Yep.
Vermont Creamery does a really good job with their social media. And they collaborate with a lot of food bloggers and recipe testers that are photographers. They work a lot with Carrie Nearshi, a local photographer here, and she does a lot of amazing photography and styling, and she's got like a whole...
Yeah, she's great. I've seen her stuff.
So she brings in all her own surfaces, and I do that as well. I was going to bring up a shoot that I did last year at a farm and shot some cheese. But in terms of props, I mean, that's you're collaborating, you're producing style sheets, you're digging into the web, and you're looking for references to see if that's something you're interested in matching in terms of style. In terms of props, it's you can go at it from a few different angles.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got a whole closet full of surfaces and plates and cups and all that
like
jazz
one
stuff.
serving of like one type of plate and
Yeah.
So what about I'm also wondering about when you're working, when a business comes to you, does anyone ever come to you with examples? Let's say they like, oh, we kind of like this type of look, or we like that type of look, and or is it a bit more organic in that conversation? I mean, what?
Absolutely. I think a big part of it is drawing inspiration from outside sources. Spend a lot of time online and in social media, Instagram particularly. I spend a lot of time drafting up inspiration boards. So in Instagram, there's a feature where you can save images right? It's like Pinterest almost on the back end of Instagram. And so I've got certain galleries that I've set up that are theme based, and I have a few food ones. And so if a chocolate company is asking for product photos, then I'll dig in and offer kind of a lookbook of different styles and looks, compositions, and then we'll kind of like lean towards one look or another, and then go from there. But yeah, there's a lot of outside referencing and research that goes into prepping for certain shoots. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can be kind of difficult sometimes to maybe, sometimes it's easier to show versus describe what you want, right? And maybe, so that's, I mean, I know that that's for anyone working with a photographer, or that's what I sometimes recommend, just to kind of take a look and cut out for magazines, go online, and because you never know if it's just, I mean, I'm sure you get an inspiration by like one little angle or some color with another color, and everyone can, you know, work that way. So any questions? Any other, oh wait, let's see here. Let's see, I'm getting so, and what about, I'm just seeing someone from Sarah, prepping, how do you feel? How, you know, does anyone ever discuss, we were talking about balance between professional photography and then in-house photography?
Yeah, that's an important conversation to have, because, you know, there's no need to sell people only professional photography. I think there should be, there's definitely a strategy to implement in-house photography, right? And it depends. Like some people, you know, front of the house managers, whoever, are pretty good at photography. We're all photographers, right? We all carry around phones in our pockets with a camera, and we're not all good at producing pretty photos, but we all have the ability to produce photos, and it's in how we use them. I think in social media, to stay consistent with documenting behind the scenes operations, documenting your company culture. This can all be done with your cell phone. But I think to understand the basics of just how to take a decent photo, you know, is all you need. But I think it can be a very powerful way to engage an audience, and to keep that audience connected to you. Instagram is a very powerful platform. That's where most of the eyeballs are right now. And I mean, you can link your Instagram account up to Facebook. So when you post a photo to Instagram, it automatically goes to Facebook. So you can minimize the efforts between the two platforms, and to come up with a strategy, particularly for restaurants that have daily specials, to work with managers in the front of the house, to, you know, take a picture of the sandwich that you're running that day and post it to Instagram is a pretty powerful thing. And it can actually, yep.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was also going to say, you know, you're talking about different channels, you know, Instagram versus Facebook versus Twitter or whatever. And so everyone has perhaps a different audience on those channels. So let's say you know, while visually Instagram is, there's a lot of activity. It's wonderful. It's like, that's for photography, right? But perhaps you do want to show behind the scenes more casual. There's a casualness to it.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's part of what is kind of capturing culture, you know, especially in small communities. I think, small businesses, I mean, they don't owe it to their audience, but it's really nice when we get to kind of get a look at behind the scenes. We see a chef bio, if we see, photos of waiters working and enjoying the space that they're in, that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
And we are attracted to storytelling, and that's what it is. You're kind of setting up an open dialogue with your audience and your customers, and I think storytelling is a big part of introducing your culture to an audience, and that's where video production comes into play too. But that's another day.
That's another. We'll have to talk about that.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah.
So we've come up on the end of our hour, and I'm going to, if you could stop sharing the screen for a second.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want to thank everyone for attending, and Brent, thank you for taking the time to chat about photography. And I could keep talking honestly about photography and never mind getting into video, but I want to say thank you very much. And we'll be having another webinar next month, and probably in early-ish mid-July, and I'll be sending out an email about that. I guess that's it. Thank you so much, Brent.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, thank you. That was great. I wish we had another hour, but
and
we should do another one.
Okay, sounds good. And you were worried. You're like, I don't know what I'll talk about, right?
Yeah, no, I know. Well, I think we had a pretty good conversation there, and yeah, we should do it again.
Thank you.
That was great. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Yep.
Bye-bye.